Hi everyone. Today's sharing to the explorers will be trust and the vibrational habits that we have. So I will focus on that. So what would we like to learn about trust, basically? And what does trust mean to us personally? The idea of truly trusting something, in my perspective, is an entirely different operating system than what I've been used to living, before, in this new energy of co-creation. So when we truly trust something, what does trust mean to us in that context? So there is always a feeling inside, a feeling of love and trusting that expansive feeling, trusting the love. That is what we're trying to learn, instead of shying away from it or not daring to believe that it's really, really there, for instances. Then in my higher perspective, in that type of situations where you are shying away from trusting love, what part of you is really attempting to achieve trust in love? And what part of you is attempting to trust and love? And what is trusting? What is trusting what? And who is trusting who? And do we really know? And just pondering. Trusting is different than knowing, because trusting is defined between two different people, two different things, whilst knowing is about the self. We think in our singularity. However, from that place of a higher octave frequency, the act of trusting is not an act that has definition in the relationship between two different beings or things. Simply put, they are the self, but you are also the whole. You are the self, you are the whole, in which the experience of the self and the other self is taking place. Therefore, you are doing the trusting. So the difference between you wanting to trust something within yourself, such as the love that you feel within, or you wanting to trust something outside of the self, such as the love that another self is claiming to have on you, is not relevant. So you are the one doing the trusting, whether it is the self within trusting the self within, or whether it's the self within trusting the other self, whether it is still you, the self that is experiencing the act of trusting the self or the other self. So it's really almost a closed loop. Looking from the singularity in this moment, the trust in the other self, or even in thyself, can ultimately be misplaced and sometimes be misconstrued. We've all experienced that. We could be lying to ourselves, or someone could be lying to us in a relationship, for example. So let's just tap into that field, that frequency. And what will the field respond? It's probably that our interpretation of trust between the self, the other self, and the whole or this way of formulating or narrating is based on an old pattern, a belief system. So in this instance, that leads us to think that there is an imbalance, that there is a discrepancy, that there is distortion, if you will, between the expression of the self internally and the experience of the self, the other self, and the whole externally, or vice versa. So let us ponder further. Yes, starting to realize that as soon as we start narrating and explaining, things become more clear. So it is like a creative effort that we are navigating. This is what we call an exploration, leading to the exact opposite that what we want to express or experience in the first place, and from the heart. So we often see ourselves in and inside the game, and we want to stop manifesting for ourselves and for the other and for the whole. So the vibrational pattern, the belief system, the program that we are observing in this case leads to energy duplication, which literally means the actual duplication of our energy in order to make the two separate perspectives of the whole self possible. In other words, you are participating in a 3-step tango dance between the self, the other self, and the whole, but a dance based on an old information and old habits is no longer beneficial for your experience of the self and the whole. So now, what you do? It has brought you valuable experiences during your immersion, during your life path experience. And these experiences or expressions have become habitual habits to you, and they become comfortable sensations. Such beliefs in separate states of the self will only limit those attempts, isn't it? So, but due to cultural and societal beliefs we carry with us throughout our lifetime, most of us brought it with us as we engaged in our exploration. We accepted that there were individualized and that there were separate parts of the self and the whole, that you had little choice but to trust without having any form of proof as to whether your trust was justified or not, that these were so-called internal and external realities of your life, as well as the people that were present themselves in your environment directly or indirectly, and in the world at large. And ultimately, thirdly, yourself. So when observed without emotion or engagement, one can come to understand that this process of perceiving separation of the self, the other self, and the whole is precious, because it essentially allows for the self to learn to trust the other self and the whole. So there is a purpose. Once this occurs, those parts only once perceived as separate can be seen for what they truly are: oneness, reflected oneness, infinitely and eternally. Then there is no more need for the gap between the perceived individuality or singularity of the self and the otherness of the reality in which the self finds itself. So when contemplating these things, one could well consider that trust before truth, where one is taught to send parts of one's consciousness outward to explore a scenario or an experience or a situation before one steps into the scenario and actually animates that field. So you can, of course, jump into any situation without much consideration, but working with the simplicity of this key principle, trust before truth, means informing the mind and the heart of one's intentions, leading to a state of focused, balanced awareness, which is real and truthful in comparison to that which is illusion or imagined. So trust before truth. Let's ponder over, let's breathe into it. It's not about trusting blindly and leaping forward into an unknown abyss, or even consider a cornerstone of spirituality and many faiths, but ultimately one that by its very nature consists of the notion of separation, a limited perception of the self, and a disjointed hierarchical levels too. So trust can only be truly experienced or expressed in truth. So one of the building blocks. So in that way, it reaches beyond the limitations of the self, embracing the other self and embracing the whole. So trust then is a creational effort. Without it, reality creation stagnates. And we are creating reality and recreating reality. So when one filters the self and the other self and the whole through a system of separation, which was previously the case in the inverted matrix, the closed loop of trust can only be created by the illusionary act of energy duplication, implying that the part of the self is duplicated either within the self or within the other self to fulfill the closed loop of trusting in a manner that is both wasteful and absolute. Interesting. So by working with energy in the way we've just described, we are not necessarily forcing ourselves to separate a part of our energy from yourself, from the self, and placing it in a part of the self that appears separate from you. So then, to compensate, we feel the need to fill the gap. But to fill the need, trust is required. And so the energy duplication goes on and on and on. So the self, actually, the self does not need to trust the self because it's the self and the whole already. It's everything. It's always been. So the simplicity of this is staggering, really. There is not this little self that we believe to be real. If we consider trust from the perspective of the whole self, is the natural state to be trust of self, the other self, the whole. Therefore, it is not really about trust, but about simply being the self in its full totality. That is what, this is what I am feeling the understanding is. what is important is that we are taking the extra step that is no longer necessary in tonal space, because tonal space is conscious space. Vibration and frequential space is unconscious space. So which becomes, tonal space becomes an habit, and then the norm in a vibrational reality based on is, so tonal space is not necessary because everything is conscious and everything is in concentric circles, part of the whole. But our vibrational reality, which has become an habit, is based on separation. So, and a feeling of unsafe all the time. So most often, without even realizing that this is how we are operating. So in order to defend ourselves against the world of separation, the self creates another version of the self, which is separate from the self, leading to duplication versus a version of the self to identify as the original self. So it creates a duplication of the self to identify the original self. So it creates a shield so the original self is shielded from the world of separation. It creates a clone of the self, less real than the self, because it has been designed to mimic true feelings and to only operate within the emotional range instead of the feeling tonal range of the cosmic consciousness grounded in Gaia. So the original self, technically unaware of this, is actually occurring. It's occurring. But it's in an energetic coma, the result of numbing itself in this way, working instead with sort of a scout of itself, which is the mind, the personality, the ego construct, will, that it inhabits instead, leaving the actual self in the void. So that place of the void that we talked about, numb and in a coma, not truly alive, not receiving or assessing life force, but instead being muted as a witness to itself, stuck in the complexity of its own making. A safety mechanism that's gone wrong may be the result of a lifetime of vibrational realities and aspects of unconsciousness in a bundle, in a framework of illusion. So all of this occurs at the level of the mind, the personality, the ego. And beyond that construct, of course, exists the persona. As explained, the persona. And it's at this level of the self that is the persona, where you can truly observe the mechanism that we are exposing here, where the ego, the mind, and the personality constructs can be observed. It's where the mechanism can be stopped and where the healing can take place. Because on the level of the persona, the various aspects of the personality can be merged, and the duplication of the self can not only come to an end, but be undone altogether. Much like, let's see, the Russian dolls, the copies of the self that operated on vibrational terms can be put back in the main tonal self and given their proper vibrational place within the larger tonal self, that is the persona, which by default exists in an expanded state that is far beyond any vibrational reality. And until we do so, there is a seconding of the self, a splitting, the creation of the altar that cannot truly access the realm of feeling, like refractions of light caught between two mirrors, going backwards and forwards, infinitely. So the more copies of the self are created in this way, the more ghost-like the personality appears, the less substance there seems to be, until these multiple refractions eventually take over the personality, even in an attempt to copy the mind, the ego, and the personality construct and the way it operates. And this narrows the parameters of one's existence to such an extent that even in the mind, in the ego personality, there's no room, because it seems impossible to move. And all the while, of course, the self, which is in itself the whole, is infinite. And once having reached tonal space, it becomes simply impossible to believe that one can split itself in such a way. So, because there is no awareness of this, as is there is no awareness of the rainbow room in Lemurian terms, where a gathering, it's a gathering, the rainbow room is a gathering room where one learns and discusses topics. So this rainbow room can be considered vibrational reality, can be considered the third density where most humans exist. And the students are offered exercises to bring it to an active understanding of time and space and past and future in the moment, in the now moment. And this just visualize this rainbow room where we gather in an alternative universe, or in another dimension, or actually between dimensions. And this space is like a bridge between the physical reality of space-time and the metaphysical reality of time-space. So in this awareness of a limited reality of the rainbow room that allows for transformation, the student lacks the ability to properly understand the space, finds it constricting, lacks the ability to understand the space and the time experience. One finds oneself into that, which now becomes the very bridge to the student's freedom, which is breaking through to tonal space, to conscious universe. So in that sense, the idea of breaking through from a vibrational reality into a more expansive tonal reality that surrounds us, it's like an egg and that is about to hatch, and considered the inside of the egg as the vibrational reality, which initially seems to contain the being within, until it has made itself ready to hatch. Then at that point, the shell cracks, which once it cracks, it forms an impenetrable boundary of vibrational reality in which the being finds itself. It becomes a bridge between the reality inside and the reality outside. So the reality inside being the vibrational reality and conscious aspectology, and the reality outside being the tonal reality that we have been discussing. So it can be said then, if we follow the same metaphor, that the bird's nest then is the tonal reality, which eventually will itself become too narrow for the being, as it were, and it leaves its nest to the universe at large, and that is the achnaic space itself, which is the space of the radiance of the ego, the unified field. And as such, and it's connected to the heart portal, and as such, we learned in those rooms, in the space between in the space between dimensions, when you in that vibrational reality as well, the vibrational self is not necessarily negative. Instead, it's got a function of allowing the incubation of the self until the self understands the holographic fractology relationship to the other self, to the whole self, and to the creator self. So there's an incubation. So once this properly is understood, the awareness of the self expands the consciousness of the tonal space completely. And there's an expansion from the vibrational self into tonal self. And this exists within the belly chakra. And it's called the Adonai Ka. That's where it exists, that expansion, when it breaks from vibrational self into tonal space. And it goes beyond. And we then learn to come to terms with vibrational habits, vibrational part of the self, as it is fundamental to be able to apply the knowledge that we've gained from being in a self-inflicted limiting experience, being in that vibrational reality, in order to be of service to others that are themselves going through the learning experience of believing themselves to be that limited. Knowing this, however, it's not so difficult to conclude that we become aware of all this and expand into the tonal self. We'll need some time to then come to terms with this expanded space. So learning how to navigate reality with this new tonal operating system is certainly challenging and unique, and it takes practice, but everything is new and exciting. So it seems that the experience waves where sometimes language is truly felt, that at other times it's harder to grasp, which suggests to us that there still might be some recovering going on. While this conversation is happening, it's becoming clear that there's still things about vibrational self that I personally have not yet realized. And I'm just an explorer like you, which affects us at many levels. I think that everyone needs recovery time once you break into tonal space. And these waves are like up and downs we're experiencing. And part of the experience is to merely be in the vibrational habit that has been affecting your entire stay, as well as everything that you've done and experienced up to this point. And that part of it is the built-in duality that forces you to believe that things that go up must come down, and that vibration runs on duality, and that the one cannot exist without the other, that the relationship between the two is expressed in frequency, and the parts of you that have become addicted to this vibrational up and down and these frequencies then would be trained to seek out those waves by working through both conscious mind and subconscious mind, but most often by working through the subconscious mind using attributes. But these attributes are passive. So in a way, you can be said to be creating ups and downs in the sense that you do not just seek them out, but generate them, because you have to come to expect them as part of your living or having lived in that vibrational frequency. So in this case, it becomes then a vibrational habit, because you are not yet used to the normal flow of the tonal universe that you're living in. Then you are living in two places for a while. So these habits individually, you can choose comfort or peace. And so, for example, peace in the tonal space is not the opposite of war. Peace is not the opposite of conflict or duality. For those that arrive in a state of a tonal peace and comfort for the first time, after a stay in vibrational space for a long, long time, peace can be very challenging. We have to get used to that peaceful state. You know, see in the space, in that tonal self, the tone in that tonal space, the tonal self, which is where peace exists. Everything is generated by the self as a hollow fractal part of expression of the all, constantly. Everything is generated by the self. Also means all memories of possible realities that one has experienced in vibrational reality before, all of it is ultimately self-generated. And there's a true sense of peace and confidence with this understanding. But it is also an uneasiness with it, because there is a realization of the hollow fractal relationship between the self, the other self, and the whole and the creator within a context of a lifetime after lifetime lived in vibrational reality. So in short, you remember that memory of that reality, of those realities of one's creation, and then peace arises as one expands into that tonal space and lets go of what once, of everything that once we felt it was real and true. So when one embraces the truth of that realization, that is not so that vibrational reality does not matter, but instead that it matters in the sense that it assists us to incubate, to self-grow, to understand the whole, much like one would remember a dream one has had, and now can use that dream to interpret the situation in walking life. One can recognize the opinions, the interpretations, the choices, and the options of a vibrational path by no longer seeing it as one's entire history, but merely a facet, of a larger all that one can begin to embrace in the tonal self. So that is when a state of truth exists in the tonal piece. And at that point, any vibrational habits will cease. For one remembers that one thought was one's past, and therefore one's future is no more important than the plot of movies and TV shows that most of us have undoubtedly read or watched in vibrational times. So we will ultimately find, as all do, that I hope that we know not merely contemplating the vibrational experience from a perspective of true tonal space. The reasons of which we have discussed is that it's remembered and treated as an experience that we have enjoyed, even though we might think of vibrational duality in a different way ourselves. So once the experience no longer has a trigger, no longer so ever encompassing around, and once you can look at it as a small part, but a necessary part to get to the big picture, your ability to interact with that vibrational reality while remaining in that tonal space of the void will emerge, which can occur quite quickly. And it will always remain as it's in its own sphere within, so a sphere within much larger spheres of the tonal and iconic selves. It would be, we will continue to observe the recurring habits, but we're just observing the habits and the perspectives. So all we've gone before, all we did before, all we saw before, in the case of concept of trust, for instance, or concept of duality itself, it presented a solid foundation to build something beyond the vibrational limitation that we once knew in tonal space, something beyond finite, where situations no longer are defined as a beginning, a middle, and an ending. It's very interesting. Very interesting. So these vibrational habits are not created voluntarily. They are a consequence all the time of vibrational activity. So, which can be translated in the gentle heart of stepping into infinity by being here now. It's lovely. It's indeed lovely. So it's like imagining that you are in a large bell. I've given you this analogy before. In a large bell that is vibrating because it has been made to ring. But after a little while, when ringing has almost faded away, but there is still a subtle audio coming out, the bell is still generating a vibration in a lower frequency cycle. Then the sound dies completely, at least as far as the ear is concerned, but the ear is wrong. What happened instead is that the vibration that one could pick up has become internalized in the being that's listening to the bell and in the bell itself. So this is two levels of understanding. The vibrations have now become part of the matter of the bell itself. Its energetic vibrational state has changed because the fact that the same vibration has also become part of the person listening who equally has now changed as a result of adding this vibration to the self and to the whole. And that is a place of tonal space, a tonal conscious space of the radiance of the ego, where we exist and manifest and we grow into and we navigate from backwards and forwards where we want to co-create. It's a beautiful space, indeed. So, as I said before to you on a messenger, listen to this several times if it's needed, and I'm sure for some it is. It is not something that is straight away easy to understand. It took me months to get to, and I'm still pondering, although I have a pretty good understanding of it now and of the space, of the tonal space that I'm in. So prepare your questions, and on Sunday, let's have a QA. And in fact, up to the every time we meet from now on, this will be the modality. So there is another 3 teachings or sharings, explorations, I call it, that are part of the co-creation process and part of your toolbox for you to take and to activate and embody as part of the completion of this annual course. And we will have this modality of you listening to the video, and then we will have our session, which is a QA, where I will responding to questions. So thank you for your time. I love you.